So my name is Olayiwola Adebowale Kehinde Onatolu. And you're probably wondering where you get Kenny from, right? So the truth be told, when I was a young kid, my parents got tired of people calling me Candy instead of Kehinde, so they just Americanized it and started calling me Kenny. So that's how you get Kenny Onatolu. So the name's not long for any reason. It's long for a specific reason. They all have meaning. Olayiwola meaning wealth turns into wealth. Adebowale meaning the crown has come home. And it's funny, and when you're from Nigeria, everybody's a king there. And I don't know how that works. Everyone, riches and joy and all this. So Kehinde meaning the second born of twins. So you're probably asking, do I have a twin? I do have a twin. I have an identical twin brother. We're about the same height, same weight. We talk the same mannerisms. It's pretty scary. If you walked in here, you guys would be shocked. So it's interesting, you know, people always ask what's it like to be a twin. What does it feel like to be a twin? And I always tell them I have no idea what it feels like not to be a twin. So I don't know how to answer that question. So growing up, we'd play games on people, we'd play tricks on people. We'd not tell them we were twins, and we'd know some people for a year or two, and we'd just have the other twin pop up. And to see the look on people's faces like they saw the Holy Ghost, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was a look between fear and creepiness and like, what is this? So we thought that was great. We thought that was funny until it happened to us, right? It happened to me. So I knew this guy. I knew him for about a year. He never told me he had a twin. Went out to lunch one day, then he invited his identical twin brother over. Saw him, I paused, my heart dropped. I thought it was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I got an opportunity to put myself in someone else's shoes, see someone else's perspective, right? So we're gonna play a game, who's who? So is it the left, or your right, or the right? So am I the guy with the watch, or the guy with the bands?
You're wearing a watch.
Gosh, that's pretty dang good. Pretty good. So this is me and my brother at my wedding, actually, and people always say we resemble a young Evander Holyfield. So I don't know if that's true or not. I'm hoping they can make a Lifetime movie, and I can play as young double. I think that'd be pretty cool. So that is my brother, Taiwo Onatolu, Abayami Taiwo Balahan Onatolu, and he is a coach. He coaches at Buffalo University, and he's been coaching for the last 13 years. So I'm a first-generation American. I was born in Chicago, Illinois. My parents were born in Nigeria. They met on a bus in Lagos, Nigeria, and interestingly enough, my mother, she came from a Muslim family, and my father from a Christian family. So essentially my mother disowned her family, left her family to be with my father. And that was, I mean, that's still a touchy subject today. So they met on a bus, and shortly after they ran away together, they got married, and they had the resources, enough resources to be able to move to Chicago and go to college, and that's where they attended college. So me and my brother, we were born in 1982, the same year my father received his master's degree. And my father, he was always a hard worker, very studious. Matter of fact, in our culture, you don't get graduation parties for graduating from high school or even getting your bachelor's. It's kind of have to get the master's and up to get a party. So I was never really into school that way. I was always into sports. I loved sports, had a passion for sports. So that was my passion. My father, he ended up receiving his PhD in business. But rewind before that, we were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, Illinois, on the south side of Chicago. And my parents tell me stories of holding one baby and holding my brother on the other side, and us crying all night, and the neighbors banging on the thin walls and telling us to keep quiet, and that's all they knew. All they knew was work and school. So my father worked very, very hard. He worked odd-end jobs. I mean, he was a taxi cab driver while he was going to school. He worked jobs. He was a butcher. He worked at a construction site. He tells me a story of when he was working at this construction site, and he loved it because he worked nights. And he was given a loaded gun, and his supervisor told him to protect the site, don't let anyone come in. And he'd never held a gun, still hasn't since that time. He'd never held a gun or shot a gun, but that was his job. He loved it because he got to study all night. So my father got his master's in '82, which was my birth year, and he tried to find jobs. He could not find a job. And he worked hard. He did other crazy jobs, and he just couldn't find a job. And what ended up happening was he changed his name to Stan. And it's well known in Nigerian culture that when you come to America, you better have an American name, otherwise you won't get a job. Now, I didn't know this till later in high school, but this is what he told me. So he changed his name to Stan Onatolu. And that's my dad. He does not look like a Stan, but that's the name he chose. That's my brother, and then that's me. So that is Stan Onatolu. He changed his name to Stan. He got a master's degree in business, but he went into the insurance business, did really well, and it moved us to Papillion, Nebraska. Now, if anyone knows where Papillion, Nebraska is, it's middle to upper class neighborhood. It's primarily Caucasian. And when we moved there, there's probably a handful of us that were black in the school. And I always tell everybody, I never knew I was black till I moved to Papillion. I never paid attention to my skin till I found out, I look different than anybody. And it was interesting growing up in a place like that. It was a great place for education, to learn, to just a great city. But I mean, people just didn't know better. They would tease me and my brother because of our names, and it's good when you have a twin, you have someone that has your back. So we got in a lot of fights when we were young, and father didn't always like that, but he would always ask if we won, and we'd always say yes. So that was a positive before the spankings afterwards. And people just didn't know better. They didn't know. They were uncomfortable with a culture that they knew nothing about, so they just teased. And football was great. Football was a great way. It was an outlet to let out your aggression without getting in trouble. So that's how we got started in football. Fast forward, I played football, got to go to college to play football, all the way fast forward, and now we're in the NFL. Got my opportunity to play in the NFL. My wife, Jessie Onatolu, she followed me around during my 7-year career. That's my daughter, Amara. So she traveled with me. She ended up getting her master's during my career, and her goal was to get into the workforce after I got done playing. So that was her goal. So during the time when I was playing, she was getting her master's, she was working hard, and she was actually working jobs, so she didn't have a time gap when she got into the real world. So shortly after I retired from football, and I'll tell you something about retirement, it's humbling, man. You go from playing in front of 70,000 people cheering your name, you're doing all kinds of fun stuff, to daddy daycare, changing diapers. And I mean, I tell you what, I became a pro at Costco. Costco was my place. I'm buying diapers. I know where their diapers are at. I know where their wipes are at. I know where their milk is at. So that was my job. I retired from playing football, and I started shopping at Costco and doing the grocery shopping. I was all in on this. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to be all in. And my wife, it was her time now to get a job. So she worked hard. She started filling out all these applications. Actually, I forgot to tell you guys something. So my wife, we've been together 16 years, 15 years, but we've been married 7 years. So commitment issues on my part. It took me a while to pop the question. So thank God she waited. I'm very fortunate of that. But fast forward, she started looking for a job, and she didn't understand, she filled out at least 100 applications, 100 job applications. She had a master's degree, she got her degree in healthcare management, and she just couldn't find a job. She just couldn't find a job. So she finally ended up getting a job at this corporation. It's an international corporation with its home base in Omaha, and she got comfortable with her superior. Her superior, for about a year into that job, her and her superior had a pretty good relationship, so she started opening up to my wife, and she told my wife, when we looked at your application, we were wondering what you were. So from my perspective, I'm thinking, what do you mean what you are? You're a human being. I didn't understand what that meant. And she said, well, your last name, Onatolu. And that's when it clicked in my wife's head, like, well, that's what Kenny's talking about, Onatolu. Well, we didn't know if you were Puerto Rican or African American or Italian or Mexican or Hawaiian. I laugh at the Hawaiian part because in college, every time me and my brother had an away game, a visiting game, and every time we'd make a play, they thought we were Hawaiian, so they would say things like, "Oh, Onatolu lays the pineapples," or "Onatolu he just cracked that guy over the skull. He just cracked his coconut," stuff like that. So when she told me the Hawaiian part, I actually started laughing, even though it really wasn't a funny situation. That I thought that was hilarious. But fast forward, that's what her superior said. Her boss told her, "Yeah, we just." We want to be, when we hire people, we just want to be comfortable. And my wife said, I mean, what does my last name have to do with me being qualified for the job? That's what she's thinking. But that's when it resonated. So that's one thing I want you guys to know, just specifically about the church. Do you guys know this stuff, that people have to change their names, get American names to have an opportunity to get a job in America? Is the church in touch with these stories, especially when it comes to minority groups? And this is a 2017 Harvard study. African American and Asian job applicants who masked their names on resumes seem to have better success getting job interviews. In fact, companies are more likely to call minority applicants for interviews if they submit whitened resumes than candidates who reveal their race. And this discriminatory practice is just as strong for businesses that claim to value diversity as those that don't. 2017. So my dad was 80s, 90s. My wife, that was 2014. And this study was done in 2017. Stan Onatolu. So I wanted to talk about bias. Do we have natural biases? And I'm talking about even the church body. So I want you to close your eyes for a second, and I want you to imagine a drug dealer. Now I want you to imagine a felon. Okay, you can open your eyes now. Okay, so I'm sure you guys have seen this before. One person's a felon, one person's a felon, one person is not. So the guy on the left does anyone know? Snoop Dogg, and the lady on the right is Martha. So Martha Stewart, she's the felon, and obviously Snoop Dogg, he's not. So this is just a good illustration of what do you picture when I say felon and drug dealer? Do you have a natural bias, even as a church body? Do you presume things that aren't true? Are there natural prejudices in your mind, in your DNA? And it's not all our fault. I mean, if you watch the media, you watch certain channels, you watch CNN, or you watch Fox, that kind of changes you. So I just want you to think about that. I have a friend that just retired from playing with the Chicago Bears. A good friend of mine, we actually played college ball together. Really good guy. He grew up in a small town, Wahoo, Nebraska. And he played for the Bears for 6 years. He's a very talented player. When he got home, about a month or so ago, he called me and we were just having a casual conversation. And he mentioned all the violence in Chicago. A lot of gang violence, a lot of bad stuff happening there. And he just kept going, and he said, Kenny, why do they, he can open up to me, and I like that. Why do they just keep shooting each other? Why do they keep killing each other? And I told him to elaborate. He said, well, I've done a lot of community service in the inner city, and they just can't get along. He said, is it a money thing? I grew up poor, and we found a way to just make it. What's going on in Chicago? So I asked him the same question. I said, Zach, probably shouldn't have said his name. You guys might look him up, but don't judge him. So I asked Zach. I told him, I said, Zach, okay, have you heard of the Gotti family, the Gambino family? Have you heard of the Hells Angels? Have you heard of the Warlocks? And he said, yeah, of course. And I said, well, they're doing the same thing. They've done it for actually quite a bit longer, but the only difference is it's glamorized in the media. So you have movies like The Goodfellas, Godfather. You have movies or shows like The Sopranos. Then you have you have Sons of Anarchy, which is a biker show. You got these great shows on TV, and the media glamorizes it. So there's no difference. There's a lot of terrible things going on in Chicago, but the Italian family has been doing crazy things for plenty of years as well, but it's just glamorized. So I challenged him to change his perspective on that. It seems towards a certain group we have biases and we're a lot harsher, and we don't even notice it. So how do we change? How do we change as a church body? For one, what Jerry did an unbelievable job of, I've never heard anything like that in my life before. You have to study history. You really do. And as a church body, that's the one thing that I just think we don't do. So you grow up, you go to school, and you learn what they call history, and that is not our history. I mean, how have we never heard of some of those guys he spoke about yesterday? That's insane. 47,000 baptisms, 400 church planted. That's unbelievable that we didn't learn that in school. So you have to study history. Once you study history, you start to have empathy. You start to understand what a certain group has been through and how and why it's led to where it's at today. You have to be in the know. Being in the know is just knowing someone's background so you know where to go. You can start with the slave trade, then you can go to the civil rights movement, Jim Crow, and redlining. So redlining is racial discrimination in mortgage lending, which forced people of color into what we now know as the projects. So when you understand the history of redlining and how a certain minority group ended up in the place that they are, you won't look at them like they're just a bunch of lazy people not doing much. There's actually history behind this. There's a structure built up to why they're in the situation they're in. Here's an effect. As a consequence of redlining, neighborhoods that local banks deemed unfit for investment were left underdeveloped or in despair. Redlining paralyzed the housing market, lowered property values in certain areas, and encouraged landlord abandonment. As abandonment increased, the population density became lower. Abandoned buildings served as havens for drug dealing and other illegal activities, increasing social problems and a reluctance of people to invest in these areas. So now you have a better understanding of what redlining is and how people were in the situation that they're in. And this is one of the biggest things that people don't know. If you study the war on drugs, you start to understand how a certain community has suffered. So the war on drugs started with Nixon, then it went to Reagan, and then it went to Clinton. Clinton's 3 strikes. So in 1992, Bill Clinton vows no Republican will be as tough on crime as he is. He passes the 3 strikes and you're outlaw, which increases funding for state prisons. And ironically, Bill Clinton, he was famous and he was supported by black voters, but he was a detriment actually to the black community. And what the 3 strikes and you're outlaw did was put hundreds of thousands of black males in prisons, and they were serving 25 years to life. So what happens after that? The men aren't in the home, and you have African American women alone in the house. So 60% of African American women are single, separated, or widowed, or divorced. That's a statistic from today. Why is that? Well, we know what the Bible says about a husband and a wife, about a man and a woman being in the household. So you have a generation of women, African American women, raising young men by themselves. No father in the home. And then the welfare system, which I know a lot about. In Nebraska, I got into real estate and I started purchasing, once I retired, I started purchasing rental properties. And I found when I was fixing these properties up, I'd get calls from a lot of single black mothers, no fathers in the home, primarily single black mothers. What I didn't know was that the government, the welfare system, the way it works is if you want to keep your voucher or your assistance, you cannot have a man in the house. And if you get caught with a man in the house, then you will be evicted and you will lose your voucher and you will never be able to get back in the program again. So even the government works in a way that it keeps the men out of the house. And that's unfortunate. I just found that out 3 years ago. I had no idea that existed. So now you have a generation, another generation of young African American women in the household by themselves, raising children and really being forced to keep men out of their own house. Coincidentally, because of that, black lesbianism is on the rise. They're actually the highest rising minority group as far as lesbianism. This was the most controversial topic over the last 3 years. Different lenses. So Ben Watson, I believe he might have retired now or he's in the process of retiring. He wrote a book called Under Our Skin. His quote was, "Black people and white people see the world through completely different lenses. The racial divide is about the reality each side sees. Each side believes it views is the true reality." Is that true? That's true. We all think we're right, and we only know what we know and what we experience. I'll tell you what, a quick story about myself. Once I graduated, me and my brother graduated college, and you have that talk with your parents when they're sending you off. And the only story my dad told me was, if you ever get pulled over, make sure you show your college ID. And I'll leave it at that. That was the story my father told my brother and I when we were going to college. Now, I'm not sure what you tell your kids, but that just to give you the mindset of where the minorities' headspace is at when it comes to race relations in the United States. So I always thought that was interesting, and I never, ever forgot that. Megyn Kelly recently just got fired from her job. I mean, she signed a $60 million contract with, I think it was NBC, to host a show, and she lost her job because she didn't know what blackface was. She thought it was funny to put blackface on and for Halloween. She didn't see what the big deal was. Now, I know I have a lot of friends and a lot of people that don't understand the history of blackface, but guess what? The church has to know, and that's the problem. The church has to know the pulse of the minority community if we want more diversity. You have to know what blackface is. There's no excuse for it. It's written everywhere, and for her not to know that, it cost her job and it cost her career. So saying I didn't know or it happened a long time ago is just not true, because there's facts and data out there showing that these things are still going on today. So let's get to Colin Kaepernick. And this is probably how we know how divided this country is as far as race relations. I think we thought we were getting places when Obama became president, but once this incident happened, I think we kind of know where we were going. So I want to ask you guys this. If Colin Kaepernick said he took a knee because no one protects that flag more than our soldiers, and I do not think our soldiers are treated fair when they come back to this country. They do not have adequate health care, adequate job opportunities, and until they get that, I'm not standing for the anthem. Would people still be mad if he was kneeling because of that reason? Would he still be disrespecting the flag? Something to think about. Or is it just a certain community, the majority doesn't understand the pulse of the community, of the minority? So I want you guys to think about that. If we can't relate, if we don't understand, we can't grow as a body of church. This is my father-in-law, Robert Haley. I talked to him about the whole kneeling thing, and this is a guy that's been on 7 tours. He's a colonel. He just retired after 30-something years. So he told me, when I'm getting shot at, and I'm running, and my guys are getting blown up, and I see that American flag, you tell me whether you should be kneeling for that flag or not. And I get it, and I get it, and I understand that, and that is deep, and that is strong. And then I gave him that quote that I just gave you guys. There's no hard line. A hard line doesn't have to be drawn. We don't have to pick a side. You just have to understand, and you just have to listen. Both sides could be right. Both sides are right. You just have to understand, and you just have to listen. And I respected what he said. And I told him, the black community doesn't think it's about the flag, it's about the people, and they're not being heard. And then he told me, you can't do that. And I said, well, we have to agree to something. So he understood when Jake Long or Kyle Long put his shoulder, NFL player, put his hands on another athlete, on one of his teammates' shoulders that was taking a knee. They met in the middle. He couldn't knee because he loved the country too much, but he understood the plight that his teammate was going through. And as a church, that's where we need to be. We don't have to pick CNN or Fox or Republican or Democrat. We're the body of Christ. That's where we have to pick. And I think we kind of get confused. I think sometimes, it's in our DNA. We were raised a certain way, and, we see abortion, and we're Republican, and we see this, and we're Democrat. And if anything, we're the church, man. And we have to, and as far as the black community, we have to understand that they want to be invited into the church. And if you don't know these things, if we just take one side, then we're not going to go very far. There is a disconnect. Christians, and this is from a book called The New Jim Crow, Christians are more likely to blame the continued disparities in wealth, incarceration rates, maternal morality, and unemployment on individual failings rather than systemic and institutionalized racism. For instance, majority of evangelicals attribute a person's poverty to his or her own lack of effort at a rate of 53% versus 32% of minority Christians who said the same. The majority of black Christians, 64%, said a person's circumstances are more of a factor than the individual effort. Now we're way off base here. We cannot be this far. There's a big disconnect, and the church has to be in the know about that. What happens when Christians relegate racism mainly to the past? People of color continue to suffer, whether it's insensitivity, ignorance, or obliviousness demonstrated by fellow church members, or the dire prospects many black people face in terms of basic professional education and health-related outcomes. A failure to acknowledge racism in its current forms perpetuates inequality. Ultimately, when black people do not feel heard, they leave. So if we really want diversity in the church, we have to listen to the message. We have to be in the know about what's going on in the community. And not from watching TV, but actually being in the community, calling one of your brothers and sisters, sitting down and having coffee with them and asking them, hey, what's going on with you? Once you study history, and Jared has done a great job at this, you start to have empathy. You don't look at people the same way. They're still bad people, but the whole point, I think, from the black community or the community of color is they don't want to be all judged by a group. They want to be judged on the individual basis. So if you have a really bad guy, he just wants to be a really bad guy, not a really bad black guy. I think that's what we're trying to say here. So you begin to have empathy, you get it. You study history, you know history. I heard a media personality say, we need to stop talking about slavery. We need to stop trying to rip off the historical bandage. Could you imagine 100, 200 years from now if we said that about 9/11? Let's not talk about that. That was tragic. I wish that never happened. Let's leave that in the past. Or could you imagine the Holocaust victims? Let's bury that in the past and never happened. That's what's going on. That's how people view slavery. Slavery is a part of history. And I went through school, unfortunately, and so did most of you, not learning much about slavery. They didn't make it a big, it's almost like you feel like they just kind of washed it down a little bit. They didn't talk about the atrocities of slavery. Even Texas talked about eradicating slavery from the history books. Now that's our history, good or bad, that's our history. I mean, those are people's grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers and great-great-grandfathers, and they spoke about that. So the church has an obligation to know all these things, all these statistics, all these things that I've talked about today. The church should be in the know about it if you want to diversify our church. So a term in football, be all in. The church should have the same mentality. You know who's all in? Solomon Foundation. I love it that when me and Doug, I think Doug might have left, first time I met Doug, invited me to have lunch with him and my pastor, Raleigh Hutton, and we just started talking. And he just, out of nowhere, he said, I'm a Trump supporter. And I just laughed because I'm like, okay, cool. And he's like, he's done a lot for the black community and this and that. And I'm like, okay, I like this dude. He's a straight up guy. But you know what I also like about him? Talk isn't cheap with him. He's the real deal. Because what does he do? He backs it up, money-wise and just physically being on campus, on church sites, talking to black people, talking to minority, and understanding what's going on in their communities. He's done it. He believes it. So I don't care if he supports Trump. I don't care if he supports Hillary Clinton or whoever the person is. I know he puts his money where his mouth is. And I know the Solomon Foundation does the same thing. And that's why I love that he invited me here, because I know he's really trying to make a change. And I think that is an awesome thing. So are you all in? Or, it's easy. It's always easy to just write a check and, I used to do a lot of this when I thought I made it into the NFL. all by myself. I worked really hard and ran really fast and lifted a lot of weights. And, I deserve to be not knowing, well, God made you, gave you your DNA, and God put you in these situations. And so are we going to be like that? Are we going to be all in? Are we going to actually get our feet into these communities? Are we going to do something? Or are we just going to sit back? Get in the community. I recommend going to a barbecue in the inner city. You got to get a little uncomfortable, get your feet wet. The place to go if you want to be in touch with the community is to go to a barber shop. Go to a barber shop. I'm telling you, you'll learn so much about the culture by going to a barber shop. And these are things I recommend you doing. So history of the church, there's no point in me doing this. Jerry did this yesterday, but I'll just reiterate. For centuries, religious leaders justified slavery by saying slave traders and owners were fulfilling a duty of Christianity by enslaving and converting Africans, whom they said were inferior to whites. Even after the Civil War, white churches supported racial segregation, which forced African Americans to create their own churches. So that's the past. Shame on me. The only Martin Luther I knew about 5 years ago was Martin Luther King. I'm sitting there, I'm doing Bible study with my pastor, and he's teaching, I'm all in, I'm on fire for God. And he's reading the Bible, and he's talking about Martin Luther. I'm like, Martin Luther wasn't that old. Like, what's he? I said, Martin Luther King? And he said, yeah. No, not Martin Luther. And I said, oh, man. So I've come a long way from then. Yeah, he got me up to speed, but that's a true story. Dr. King says it's appalling that the most segregated hour, and you know what, I'm going to skip over this. Jerry stole my thunder. So most up 11 a.m. at church. We know this. We have to learn from our past. The worshipers, and this was an illustration my pastor gave a couple years ago. It's fascinating. The worshipers in the church could hear the cries of people in the train car nearby drifting into their gathering. The discomfort was plain on their faces as they listened to the captive Jews banging on the inside of their car, screaming for help. But not one of the parishioners heeded the distress calls of their fellow human beings. Not one of them ran outside to offer help. Instead, the pastor raised his voice so the congregation could hear the end of his sermon. When it came time to sing, the pastor instructed the choir and the congregation to sing a little louder to drown out all the wailing. And that speaks for itself there. Another Dr. King, the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. So when good people that know better, the church knows better, and we don't say anything, and we're not in the know. Now, I would say obliviousness and ignorance nowadays, with some of the things I've said, the church has to know that. And if you don't know, you have to open up a book and you have to read. Church and change, church and diversity, be in the know. American diversity continues to be on the rise, with all racial and ethnic minorities growing faster than the majority from 2015 to 2016 in the United States. So whether we like it or we don't, the United States is becoming very diversified. You don't want to wait till, a daughter or a husband marries someone from a minority or a majority group. You want to get to learn about people's cultures. I talk about my wife and our families here, and I'll fast forward here. My wife and her family, when she first brought me home, it was a look of, oh. And then, my name's Kenny Onatolu, and see, I didn't know any different. I grew up in Papillion, so I grew up primarily around all white folks, so it was normal to me. But when it's normal. It's just not what you probably picture when you picture giving your daughter away. You don't picture, Nigerian music playing at the wedding or goat meat being served. And that's what happened at my wedding. So it's normal. It's very normal. It's not a bad thing. But I think now with this statistic that America is becoming more diversified, hence the church will be more diversified, we have to be aware of this. What if your daughter brought home an African-American man? What if your son brought home an African American woman or a Latino woman? How are you going to handle it? Are you going to be shocked? Are you going to say, oh, or are you going to be okay with it? So we have to be uncomfortable. We have to get uncomfortable in the church, meaning just get your feet wet. And I think a lot of people do a good job of this. This is part of being in the community, getting involved with the community. You go to a Black church, music might be a little different. People might be praising a little different, but it's always good to know. I don't see color. Now, I've heard that 1,000 times in my life, and I actually laugh at it because in my head I'm thinking, no, I want you to see color. So I challenge you guys, see color. Guess what? When you see color, you get to learn about people. You get to learn about the cultures. If you say you don't see color, then you're only looking at that person from your own perspective. So if they don't eat the same things you do, or if they don't speak the same way you speak, then you might look down on them. You might have bias towards them. So see color, see culture, see color. Know that I'm an African American man and ask me questions. My best friend, Dave Tollefson, big guy, 6'4", 270. He was the first person, played for the Giants. He was the first person in my life that ever asked me what my name was. And that was when I was 28 years old. He asked me, why is your name so long? It has to mean something, right? And coincidentally, he grew up in the inner city of California, and he grew up around a bunch of Pacific Islanders. And his best friends were Pacific Islanders, so he knew the name had meaning. He was the first person, no teacher, no former teammate, nobody. So see color, because once I told him about where I'm from and what my name means, he started asking me, so I heard you guys eat this. Yeah, we eat goat meat. What does it taste like? Well, what does hamburger taste like? It tastes like meat, We started learning all these things about each other, so see color. My pastor, Raleigh Hutton, and my mentor, he always says eternity is at stake. Let's not let this, at the end of the day, this doesn't, race. It's huge in America, but eternity is at stake, man. We're dealing with souls here. We're dealing with heaven and hell here. So let's do these little things to get in touch with our society, to get in touch with the culture. These are two resources that I really, really recommend that are good, that kind of give you a perspective into what I'm talking about. So these are a couple books I recommend you should buy. Under Our Skin is by Ben Watson, and he gives a real good perspective into just the way a African American's mind works. And then this is the challenging one, and this will challenge you. It's called The New Jim Crow, just to kind of tell you about how the past is still affecting the present and how you can work on empathy by reading this. So I recommend these two. So last story. So my wedding was crazy. So we went to Mexico because we didn't want to invite 1,000 people, and my father-in-law was cheap. So you play in the NFL, and all of a sudden it's like, you know who's supposed to pay for the wedding, right? Father, right? So giving his first daughter away, all of a sudden he's nowhere to be found. So me and him had a talk, but fast forward, we have this wedding and people from Nigeria came, people I haven't seen in forever. They came, and then you had my wife's side, which is, mainly South Dakota, Nebraska, and you have like Nigeria. So you're talking about two different cultures. And my dad, like the Nigerian culture, like they yell at you, like they'll yell, "Your dress is beautiful," and they're yelling at my wife, and she's doesn't quite, like they're yelling at her. They just talk really loud. So, and my wife's family is like, man, this is kind of crazy. So there's my wife, there's me, there's one of my aunts. And it was awkward. The DJ was playing the music, and my parents, they dominate, like a lot of Nigerians do, as far as this is how we're gonna do things. So the DJ, they gave the DJ some music. They just took over. Forget all the song list that my wife put together. They gave them their song list, and they're playing, it's a fast rhythm music, and they're dancing, and they're doing that thing. And I see my wife's family, it's segregated. They're all the way back there, and they're looking like, man, what is this? Then the DJ, okay, American music. So they start playing YMCA, and to the left, to the right, clap your hands, right? So they start doing that, and my parents are looking like, what is this? So There's me, there's my dad. Sorry for the resolution, but there's my wife. But by the end of the night, all of us were gathered around, we were dancing, we were doing our thing, we were dancing to both types of music. I mean, all my friends that went to my wedding said it was the most unique wedding they've ever been to, and they actually said it was the best wedding they've ever been to. And this is what happens when we let our biases aside and we just join in on the fun. So this is an interesting picture here. So in some cultures, if you have a woman and you're throwing money in the air, that's not necessarily a good thing. But in the Nigerian culture, when you get married, everyone brings out their dollar bills and you make it rain on the bride. So it's cool understanding different cultures, how in one culture it's not necessarily the best thing, but in another culture it's the greatest thing. So here's a little plug for me. So I was teaching Sunday school. It starts young, and I know a lot of you here have children. I was teaching Sunday school. Me and my wife do it once a month. And this little girl, she was 3 years old. She came up to me. This was just 2 years ago. And she said, "Your skin's dirty." And then my wife froze, and there was another lady in there, and she froze. And it's okay. So I just sat her and I said, "No, that's just my skin color. God made me this way." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then we were done. But it gave me the idea, like, okay, she clearly hasn't been around black people, but that's not her fault. Like, I don't expect her parents to drive to certain places and it's kind of hard. So I thought about writing a book and just talking about differences and teaching our kids at a young age about different cultures. And I think that's the problem. We have kids and we're in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and we don't teach them about black people or Chinese people or people from other countries. We just kind of let them learn. And what if you grow up in a place like I grew up, Papillion, Nebraska, where there was 5, maybe 6, maybe 10 black people in the whole school? Then you have your perceptions from TV or from the media, and that's what you end up carrying on with you for the rest of your life. And it's really hard to change that. So here's my shameless plug of my book. It's on Amazon. 2 of a Kind. It's a great children's read. Shameless plug, see? Yeah, so it's actually about me, and you see how the illustrator made my arms bigger than my best friend? That's the Giants guy I was telling you about. That's his son. But it was my part of trying to be all in. I'm like, even children at a young age don't really understand, so it's time for us to start educating ourselves and our children. So now what I currently do, I work with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I'm the Omaha Public Schools representative, and that's the inner city. So I get to work with a lot of these single mothers that send their kids to these schools, and I love it. Get to talk to them about God and about having Him be their number one. I work with coaches as well. I'm also in real estate, involved in the inner city, trying to do my part to turn around the inner city. And that's about it. Yeah, we could do some Q&A. Yeah. If anyone has any questions.
You gave us recommendations on what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything, the fact that you have a specific idea for what to do to reach people, is there anything what not to do that would do right the opposite?
What not to do. See, I'm a guy that if you don't know, you should ask. So I don't really believe in that. If you really just don't know, you just like a lot of people, they're worried about offending somebody. But like that little girl, she asked me that question. I wasn't offended at all. My wife was more like, "Oh, that is horrible. I should spank that girl." That's probably what my wife was thinking. But me, but it's like, no, she just doesn't know, and adults don't know either. And if you don't know, you just have to ask. It's better to ask and know so you can do something about it.
We just did I don't know if you're friends with him. He works with the FCA as well in Atlanta. His name is Cameron Friend, and we did His name is Cameron Friend, and we did I saw this done in Atlanta, and I wanted to do it with our high school students. And so we did a panel with him, and it was 2 other black communicators. And basically, our students asked a lot of questions. He did the history of racism in America
Right.
the first week, and then he came back the next week, and we did an open discussion panel. A lot of the students asked a lot of really good questions. It was super informative, and that's one thing that we did, and it's working in a way that. So here's what I came back from that, and I think we're just at the beginning of it with our students. But I was really frustrated by the whole thing, and I was frustrated with our students because a lot of them felt like this was very interesting to me. So I asked a lot of our adults how the panel went, and they were super impressed and excited and informative,
Right.
ignorant, realizing the ignorance
Right.
of a lot, which was the goal of, hopefully, of our students. That was kind of the goal. And then the question of the panel, the question at the end of the night with the panel was, okay, what is your responsibility to racism in America? What's our responsibility as the church? And what I thought was interesting, though, was Generation Z, which is a high
Right.
school pastor, that all of them were offended by Cameron in the panel, and they were mad because
Right.
they felt like he was blaming them.
Who's attacking
He
them?
was
Yeah.
attacking them.
Yeah.
But all of the adults, what I would say is sort of the beginning of the millennial and Gen Xers,
Right.
none of them felt blame. And I thought
Right.
that was a very interesting thing.
Right.
And so I shared that with somebody who can really take that and do something with it, because I can't do anything with that, I don't think. But I thought that was an interesting divide in Generation Z and then some of the upper echelons of the millennials and even into the Gen Xers, that they felt he's attacking me,
Right.
and I don't have anything to do with this. Why am
Right.
I responsible for it? Which I think a lot of goes back to social media and
Right.
different elements. But 5 things that he said that I thought were awesome, and him and his father came up with these. He said, listen, the greatest gesture that you can do is to listen. Humility is listening. Number 2, he said, believe us. Number 3, he said, befriend us. Number 4, he said, care for us, show compassion. And number 5, he said, stand up for us. And I thought so he gave that to our students. I'm still thinking about how to respond to our students with this because they have a lot of questions.
Right.
But it's been a good beginning point for us. But I just wanted to share that, and that'd be an idea for some of these other churches to do in their own community.
Right. Yeah. Panels are great, and we are emotional human beings, and people get defensive, and when you feel like you're just getting beat on, and it's not your fault, it never happened to you. That's the tough part. But it takes people like Jerry, people like you, to be the leader. So if I say all these things, I mean it's good. I think some people will listen, but when a guy like my friend David Tolson, when he speaks up, and people are like, well, he has no fight in this game. He's just, a white guy that made a lot of money playing in the NFL, and why is he talking so passionate about this? So really, it's when guys like you send that message, that's when change actually occurs. Not saying that my voice doesn't mean anything. It means something, but it means so much more when someone like you does it. So commend you for that.
So you attend a predominantly white, that's a nice word, predominantly.
Yeah.
Church.
Yep.
That's pretty affluent.
Yep.
Are there a couple things that you look at and you're like, just really practical? If they would just do this, maybe they would start to understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that stood out, there was this pastor there, and he was just understand a little bit. He want to tell the story. He was preaching, and he started off his sermon, and he was talking about how he left a certain place and he moved to the hood, right? So it's me and my wife. There's probably another black couple in there, and that's it. And he said, I moved to the hood, and he snickered a little bit, and then the congregation started laughing a little bit, and me and my wife, we didn't find it funny. And he actually proceeded to say that, he's living there now, and it almost came off as if he was doing that place a favor. There's people that, the way I took it, there's people that live there. They call that place their home. So to say hood and to almost in a sense act like, it felt like he was coming off like he was the savior of that community and he didn't have to be there, but he wanted to be there to support the community. It just rubbed me the wrong way. But I felt like no one else picked that up in the church but me and my wife. And I imagine, would he have said that if it was a church full of African American people? Probably not. So subtle little things like that. And I wish I chickened out, but I wish I just talked to him about it, because I know if I said, hey, you understand what you just said? And if we had to talk, he would say, oh no, come look, I got a bunch of black friends. That's usually what it is. I got a bunch of black friends. And I'm like, well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you got to watch what you say. So I need to do a better job of speaking up. That's a big thing, but it's a subtle thing too. You know, and I just think, you know, he just didn't know any better.
What do you think? Give us some insight on staff diversity.
Yeah.
How to look at staff and try to hire in such a way that would show the communities around us that they're welcome, simply because that's who we have on our leadership. Our staff.
Yeah, it's tough.
Could they hear it?
It's tough. I'll say this, the NFL, a number of years ago, they implemented a rule called the Rooney Rule. And it was a rule that essentially forced the owners, who 99% of it are white Americans, to actually even interview black coaches. Here you have a league that's 78% black, and interestingly, 69% of those African American players are from the inner city, that's another statistic. But 78% black, and you have no black coaches, and these coaches aren't even getting interviews. So that was called the Rooney Rule, and it's done its job, and there's still ways around it. They're still refining it. But I just think, you know, being intentional about your hiring practices. Are you looking in other areas, or are you just primarily just, you know, looking at resumes and this guy, just really forcing the issue? Because if you don't, people say that's unfair, but if you don't force the issue, you'll be missing out on a bunch of people that have the prerequisites in the resume to actually, you know, help your congregation or help your ministry.
Before I ask this question, I just want to be straight with you. I'm about to ask your perspective.
Okay.
I'm not trying to start an argument, but I want to
Yeah.
take my perspective first.
Okay.
I'm a white man.
Yep.
I hear some of this history last night.
Yep.
I hear that we still have black churches. And as a white man, I gotta be honest with you, I feel like where did we go wrong?
Right.
You know, why are we doing that? Why haven't we integrated? Now, I want to know your perspective. What do you think about the fact? I just want to learn from this.
Okay.
What do you think about the fact that we still have all black churches out there?
You know what? Unfortunately, like for me, it doesn't surprise me. It's actually what I would expect. I think time goes along, and I think you end up having a black president, and that makes it look like everything's okay. But part of it goes to studying history again and being in the community. And once you're in the community and you understand the community and you understand what the people are saying, then you start to see things aren't what we say they are. When you understand that people have to whiten their names on job interviews, you start to understand, oh, we're a far ways away, and then you're not so surprised. So from my perspective, I mean, it's unfortunate. I think we should all be we should all be diverse. There shouldn't be black churches, but that's where we are now. I mean, the first step is talking about it, and it's not me. I can't do much. You know, I can use the platform that I have, but it'd be guys like you actually talking to your friends that maybe might be a little naive and don't know the truth and speaking up for what's right.
So I guess it's accurate to say that your dream would be someday we don't have that anymore.
100%. Yeah, for sure. 100%.
What does your name mean? And what does your full name mean? And then where did Kenny come from?
So yeah, that was the first part. So Olayiwola means, gosh, I got to think about this. Olayiwola means wealth turns into wealth. Kehinde means twin. So I have an identical twin brother, so it's a nickname. You ever meet someone with the name Kehinde, you know their twin brother or sister's name is Taiwo. So that's a fact. You guys, pretty cool right there. Write it down, yeah. And then Olayiwola means the crown has come home. Yeah. But I'm not a king, you know. I'm not a king. There you go. Amen. I like it.
Any other questions?
Yoruba. I speak CSC a little bit here. I threw Spanish in there, but I speak a little. I understand it, but I don't. I know like the bad words. Parents yelling at me when I remember those. I don't remember anything else for the most part. Yeah, I know.
Any other questions? If not, we want to go ahead and wrap it up, and thank you, Ken, for this amazing.
Thank you.